Good morning to all of those in the Americas, and good evening to everybody in the Middle East and around the world. And welcome to the Global Energy Outlook Forum 2024. This is session 20, 12 hours later after starting early doors, at least in the UAE time clock, in China. And all of the demand outlook from the Asian stories through the Middle East, Europe, and now the Americas. And of course, we're back in a way, in a mirror to the Middle East, and at least in the context of a supply story in the context of the Americas. The Global Energy Outlook Forum today welcomed 50 energy analysts from around the world, in which our three guests this evening are the 48, 49, and 50th. And so we're delighted to welcome them to the table. And before we get started, I just wanted to set the scene with a note about the IEA, the International Energy Agency, just published recently their first ever in-depth outlook of Latin American energy industry, which is kind of surprising that it's only the first one in November 2023. But nonetheless, they made a fairly positive statement about the opportunity, or at least the potential, that Latin America could make major contributions to global energy security and clean energy transitions with the right packages of policies on top of powering the region's own transition and generating major benefits for local economies after a decade of sluggish growth. Which brings me to the title of our session here. Will 2024 be the year that sees the Latin Golden Goose of energy production finally return to its natural cruising altitude? It early seems romantic to think of the days not so long ago when Venezuela was producing 3 million barrels a day of oil. Let's kick off with Aldo Flores Quiroga, former Deputy Secretary of Energy for Hydrocarbons, Mexico's Ministry of Energy, and Senior Advisor at FTI Consulting. Aldo, is this the year that the industry in your part of the world finally kind of gets to a new dawn, given the massive resources and potential?
Well, I can only wish it were like that, Sean. It's still a year of transition. It's a significant year of transition in large economies like Mexico. Transition in Argentina, because we have a new economic program that we have to yet know how it will unfold. Less of a transition, obviously, in Brazil and Guyana, where we can expect output to continue growing. But in terms of the type of policy shifts that would be required to see a major change in oil and gas production, let alone renewables, I don't think we're still there. Mexico is going to have elections. Venezuela is still not really with a political equation that it has been solved. And those two cases alone that have represented the largest share of Latin America's oil output are providing such mixed signals that it is hard to say that we're going to see a significant change. That said, I do agree with what the IEA is saying in its outlook. The region has immense potential. It has been for a long time the region with the only region in the planet, or sub-region in the planet, with an energy surplus and with the cleanest energy mix. And it has all that is required for the future of the energy transition, except for the right policies.
Jose Shalhoub, LATAM consultant at Azure Global Consulting and Venergy Global, sitting in Caracas in Argentina, where we saw last year would appear, I mean, part of this sort of new dawn mythology, maybe it is, but nonetheless, that Venezuela finally has been able to come out from some fairly cumbersome sanctions, U.S. sanctions, and saw oil exports increase 12% last year to almost 700,000 barrels a day. Does it feel like a new dawn for Venezuela, or?
Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you very much for this opportunity and invitation. Well, yes. Well, personally, I think and I sense, and I changed my view of what I had about Venezuela, I don't know, the last couple of years, because I was totally skeptical about where Venezuela was heading and where Venezuela was going. I come from from the Venezuelan state-owned company. I work there, but right now I sense that things might change significantly in the next couple of years, but this year will be definitely crucial. We have seen not that high growth of Venezuelan oil production, but definitely we are seeing some changes that could lead us to think about a sustained growth of production, depending on how the Venezuelan political dynamics move on. Remembering that we are having the presidential elections this year. Nobody knows exactly when, but traditionally the presidential elections are held in December. Also, there is a significantly widely held view that the changes that are being carried out by the new PDVSA authorities are kind of more positive than in the past. So we might think, and I personally think, that we are heading towards a new environment for Venezuela's oil production this year.
Well, the third guest that joins us today, Carlos Garibaldi, Executive Secretary, Association of Oil, Gas, and Renewable Energy Companies of the LATAM and the Caribbean, again referencing the IEA report where 15% of global oil and natural gas resources are based. Carlos is sitting in Uruguay, in Montevideo, and Carlos educated in Argentina, so I'll take that segue, as Argentina is one of the corners in LATAM that signals a new beginning. Of course, it's always had that massive shale oil opportunity there. Do you see a new dawn in Argentina with the new president and the new outlook there?
Well, there was never a big divergence of views on energy in Argentina. It's one of the issues where there is agreement of the development of Vaca Muerta, independent of the political party, and also on the exploration of the Atlantic margin. Now, we may see more deregulation, we may see, but there has to be a rationalization of the subsidies that are given to energy. So that's going to create some problem with inflation. You know, the energy and transport in Argentina are severely subsidized, and how fast you get people that are you win the people that are used to the subsidy, and how will it work? But we see, I don't think there is a scenario where we wouldn't continue to grow output from Vaca Muerta, both for oil and gas, and continue with exploration in Argentina.
What about the debt challenge? This sort of, I mean, what are the reasons the region has struggled to reach its potential? Policies and politics. Can Argentina's new government overcome the crucial test of the $16 billion U.S. judgment?
Well, we have to wait and see about that. How are they going to try to negotiate who's going to pay? If YPF is going to pay or the government is going to pay. But that's something that I think it needs to be addressed.
Aldo, back to obviously Mexico and the region, but from a Mexico point of view, new policies. How much of this sort of struggle to get back to to get forward to the full potential of Mexico and Latin America's energy potential is domestic straitjackets that you impose on yourselves, or that the outside imposes? I mean, where those two meet, what needs to change? What can be changed by yourselves rather than by relying on financing from Wall Street or, political permissions from Washington and so forth?
Oh, what a question. I think that's
just trying to get for the world to understand how much of this is a domestic problem rather than because we're all used to, big footing, big stepping international superpowers affecting a lot of things. And is that the case there, or is it just homegrown problems?
It used to be, if we go back to the early 20th century, that yes, foreign powers were exerting a lot of influence. And in fact, their legacy did affect the political dynamics for the energy industry, especially the oil and gas industry. And that's why we saw regimes, investment regimes that were really close to the private sector. But that changed. And now we have a more mixed picture in the region. However, it's still the case that it is the domestic political environment, the domestic constraints that, in my view, are hindering energy growth, energy investment in the region. They are leaving that investment much shorter to what it should be its potential. I'm thinking of what Carlos just said about Vaca Muerta. I mean, no doubt Vaca Muerta is the place where the opportunities are. And one can only wonder if the investment regime were a little bit more open, what could happen to Vaca Muerta in terms of the development of infrastructure and more E&P work and the like. For Mexico,
so there's also the Gulf of Mexico offshore, which is a huge opportunity as well, given what the United States have done with their side of the Gulf.
Yeah. So for example, Mexico has not, as a society, as a country, decided on what type of system it wants. So we had a very closed system, then it went to an open system, and then it went closed again. And these type of signals do hinder the potential for the energy industry. Investment is not as strong as it could be. And therefore, we're seeing, in the case of Mexico, stagnant production, actually declining production since 2004 for oil and gas. We were supposed to see more investments in renewables, but again, the shift in the policy regime did not allow for such a transformation. That may change. Connecting with this session, just very quickly, 2024 is we will be electing a female president, and both candidates are very well prepared. They are engineers. They have been working on either environmental science or artificial intelligence or intelligent buildings. So they're very aware and very much inclined towards the sustainability agenda. They may bring a change for renewables, and I think they will bring some sort of correction for oil and gas, because the current model is not delivering as much as it could.
Jose, given the developments, the political developments that have opened up Venezuela's new opportunity, obviously it's very recent, but now we start a new year where it's on the table. Can it move quickly? Is it still constrained by lots of politics? How do you see it now moving forward? Obviously, as I said in my opening and introduction, when I was last in Venezuela, you were producing 3 million barrels a day. What's the journey ahead, do you think? Politics and technical challenge?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the technical challenges are mounting, are lots of them. Of course, it's not going to be easy to recover and to go back up to the 3 million barrels we were producing back in 2004 or even before. But if surely it will much depend on how the political dynamics will unfold, especially between Venezuela and the United States. Recently, and I have the knowledge that different companies have been rushing into Venezuela to get their, their share of the pie. Of course, the production has not been ramping up significantly because the production has been averaging between the 700 and 800,000 barrels per day. The target ideally for the government was to reach the 1 million or so barrels per day by the end of 2023. That goal wasn't met. But I have the belief that for this year, if no changes or no, obstacles appear on the road after the elections in Venezuela and the United States, because the United States has been the main player in trying to unlock the situation regarding the Venezuelan oil industry. And that's why we have been seeing different breakthroughs recently in Venezuela, like the return of Chevron, for example, to operations, the return of different companies like Eni or Repsol after Washington eased the sanctions against Venezuela oil and gas sector. But there's also the situation about Citgo, for example. Citgo is the most critical challenge for me, for the Venezuelan government to deal with now that the U.S. government decided.
Why is that?
Because recently, a couple of days ago, there was a decision by a Delaware court that to allow auctions to the different creditors of Citgo because of the huge amount of debts that Citgo had to different companies. Remembering that during the former administration of Hugo Chavez, and now the Maduro government, and also under the interim president Juan Guaido, Citgo was at the center of the political battle, and it has been under huge pile of debts. But recently, a U.S. Delaware court decided to allow for auctions of shares of the jewel of the crown company of PDVSA in the United States. For me, that's the most critical challenge right now to deal with by the Venezuelan government regarding PDVSA.
Carlos, there's been just speaking with Aldo there and earlier discussions, that the swing to the left in Latin American politics in recent years has, there's been views that has been one of the inhibitors of the energy industry's expansion and development. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the return of Lula da Silva as the president of Brazil, changing that narrative. He's left of center politician, president, but yet seems to be very supportive of advancing the oil and gas industry in Brazil. Is that the right reading? And is that potentially a new reference for left of center politicians and leaders in Latin America to take the energy industry forward?
No, I think like in Argentina, in Brazil, there's no ideological debate on developing of the natural resources. So they've been developed under Lula before, and under Bolsonaro, and they continue under Lula. Brazil has the cleanest matrix, and they will continue with the renewable energy efforts, but in parallel with fully developing and monetizing their pre-salt reserves. I think we cannot make a general statement that left is anti-hydrocarbon industry and right is pro. It depends on each situation in particular.
But what we can say, for example, that left has been pro subsidies and has had a difficult time in reforming the pricing system for fuels in general in the region. But it is the case that there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of shades of pink in the region, and not everywhere are we seeing some variation of pink. Argentina is now the prime example. But in terms of social policies and the way that they translate into some sort of interference in the pricing mechanisms for the energy industry, there's still a long way to go. An interesting case from the left side is Colombia. with Petro disincentivizing oil and gas and pushing for renewables. That's an interesting case to see how it develops. But just to connect again with the Brazil story, I think it's a great example of how there can be some middle ground between various positions. Petrobras, after all, is a company that is public, that has delivered, and that has the type of flexibility that other national companies like Pemex don't have. So there
With
is
access to capital that is so critical.
Exactly. And speaking of access to capital, one more point. Capital will go where there are good projects. Good projects are more likely to be seen where there's good policy. And so again, the constraint is more regional, domestic than external.
And Carlos, go ahead.
Sean, if I may, I would like to make a broader point about the theme of this conference. We're talking about a golden goose, and we're talking about the second largest reserves in the planet coming from the region. And the growth potential is there, but there are boundary constraints. The political boundary constraints that we discussed, and of course, environmental and climate boundary constraints. But more important than that, I think, is the fact that we should feel some dissonance. Latin America, Caribbean supplying 9% of the production, oil production, and holding 19% of the proven reserves. So there's something there that doesn't work. And the one thing that's, when you look and zoom into Latin America, Venezuela holds 92% of the oil and 78% of the gas in Latin America and the Caribbean. That brings some dissonance also, because those are supposed to be proven reserves. At the current rate of about 750,000 barrels a day, that yields an RP ratio of 13 centuries. But if you take it to the peak, to the historical peak of 3.5 million barrels a day, that would be 238 years. So still, I think there is a problem. The reserves and the resources are likely there, but there might be a problem on the issue on what gets classified as proven reserves. And there's another curious fact that they're the same reserves every year, regardless of the withdrawals.
Well, it wouldn't be the only country with that magical calculator.
No, but it would be the most striking case, I think.
And let me,
please, Jose.
If you allow, yes, and this is something that I always stress out, that Latin America, unlike any other region, if I dare to say, is almost totally free of geopolitical risks. I mean, unlike the Middle East, unlike Africa, this is not something that I don't know, talking bad about any other continent or whatever, but Latin America's geopolitical risks free. I mean, we have our internal, each country.
That's kind of an interesting statement from a country that has had Chavez and is that not a geopolitical risk? I don't know. I mean, you tell me.
No. No, I mean, it's conflict free, you know? I mean.
Oh, right. Okay.
Maybe Guyana is feeling a geopolitical risk.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, personally, I don't think this whole crisis between Venezuela and Guyana, and I've been stressing this in my recent participation here. I mean, this is not something that will reach anywhere. I mean, it's just political circles. That's it.
I just posted a survey question there about the outlook for the year ahead, which is ultimately our focus here as to whether we saw, speaking of Guyana and other areas, a significant growth in production capacity in the Americas as a whole, in the United States and in Latin America in this 2023, and whether we could see a continuation of that in 24, Aldo, that will require OPEC to revisit its calculator in terms of the cuts it's making to try and sustain a market price that they're comfortable with, like shale was in the past, and maybe it was again last year. Does Latin America's production be potentially a spoiler for OPEC Plus now as it recovers?
Well, only to the extent that Brazil and Guyana grow their production much more than what we expect already. We are expecting still around 3 million barrels per day for Brazil. Guyana will continue to grow from where it was, 300,000 barrels last year. We're going to keep seeing that growth. That will require definitely a recalculation by OPEC and other players in terms of what the balance will be for the market and who will be providing it. But the broader point here is that what we can expect in terms of where the action will be remains in terms of in Brazil, in Guyana, potentially Argentina, in terms depending on what the policy change finally accepted will be. But elsewhere, I don't expect much significant changes.
Carlos, just to pick up, I mean, we've talked a lot about the hydrocarbons, oil and gas, so to speak, but do these same challenges exist for the renewables and the low carbon opportunity? I mean, we've seen, as mentioned earlier, that Latin America has been very successful in advancing its new renewables and low carbon energy. Are they exposed to the same challenge, or can they move forward ahead of oil and gas?
Well, there is Latin America, as you said, is moving. The industry in Latin America and the Caribbean, our associated companies, are moving very aggressively on decarbonization. Not only decarbonization, like the U.S. companies, but also in diversifying their portfolios with renewable energies. Now, we have a problem in Latin America in general from in licensing and permitting. Permitting takes too long. It can take many years in Brazil. And that same problem affects renewables, and that same problem affects mining. We're talking about electrification, and we don't have enough metals and critical minerals. And people love windmills, and there should be more mines, but not in my backyard. So there is a problem of what can be achieved and how those barriers can be removed to accelerate the energy transition in general. Not only hydrocarbons as a base supplier, reliable base supplier, but also the renewables and also the minerals needed for electrification.
Jose, just to start to wrap up here, looking at the wider geopolitics of Venezuela's recovery in terms of oil and gas, agree that LATAM will grow significantly in 24 to compel OPEC, so we'll see where that goes. But where does that, as Venezuela sort of tries to find a way forward with the United States and Washington, Jose, how do they balance that with their debt to China, their relationship with Russia? How does that triangle free up Venezuela to move forward with the U.S.?
Yeah, it'll continue to be a give and take situation, and what further concessions the Venezuelan government will continue to make to the United States and vice versa. Also, the Caracas hasn't shown any hints that it will change its traditional geopolitical relationship with Moscow, with Beijing or Tehran. There are planned investments by Iranian companies, by Chinese companies, even though that the intensity of the relationship between Caracas, Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran has kind of lowered a little bit in the recent years. Has not, the relationship between all of them have not been that intense as for what they've been during the Chavez era, for example. I mean, it's visible. But despite all that, Maduro hasn't shown that he will change, or he will side definitely with the United States. But it will be crucial for Caracas if it wants to keep up the pace of investments by the U.S. and European oil companies, coming to Venezuela and to coming to invest here. It'll be crucial for Caracas to calibrate that situation in the coming months.
Aldo, last word to you, and just quickly, is the Brazil joining OPEC plus, becoming part of that equation, BRICS becoming more than what it was. What do those things mean, do you think, for Latin American energy, oil and gas, or is it not?
Brazil has been clear that joining the OPEC plus conversation does not mean joining collective decisions to cut production, especially because Petrobras is a public company. So on that count, it doesn't mean that much, but it is significant that such a new big player in the oil industry is having a closer conversation with OPEC members. So I understand it in terms of that, a closer conversation going on, and that will in some ways affect perspectives of market calculations that OPEC might be making, OPEC plus. In terms of BRICS and the geopolitical equation, the BRICS is a statement of countries with very different characteristics. Initially, it was large emerging markets. Now it's becoming some sort of statement about an alternative view, possibly of globalization. But does it mean that it will have the political weight to affect international affairs or regional affairs? It's not so clear. It's not clear that Russia and South Africa or Brazil and India are in the same page with respect to where the global agenda is going. So these are still interesting and influential conversation processes, but whether they are going to have an on-the-ground concrete influence on policy, it's still an open question.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there and close out our LATAM session. And thank you very, very much for your time and insights. Really, really useful to get some on-the-ground insights from Mexico, Venezuela, and Uruguay. So Aldo Flores Quiroga, Carlos Garibaldi, and Jose Shalhoub, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Take care.